Okay, tonight we're going to take a look at domain and range, and keep in mind that domain we're talking about the x values, and range we're talking about the y values. X-axis goes left to right, y-axis goes up and down. And this should be a pretty quick set of notes, and I really like domain and range, so I hope you have as much fun as I do. Okay, as I said before, the domain is a set of all possible x values on the graph. The range is the set of all possible y values on the graph. And we are going to go ahead and find the domain and range of each graph. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about interval notation. I'm going to write that up here at the top. Interval notation. So we're going to write the domain and the range as an interval. So we are going to use interval notation. And what that means is if we are including the value, we are going to use a bracket. This means that the number is included, kind of like a closed circle, or the solid line on a systems of equations, or the closed circle on an inequality. Means the number is included in our set. If we have a parenthesis, that means the number is not included. And I'll show you what that means on the next 4 examples. So let's take a look at example 1. We need to find the domain and the range. So again, keep in mind that domain are all the possible x values. And so what I like to do is to just box in my my graph. So I'm going to use the highlighter for this one because I think it's easier to see. So if we look at the right side of the graph, the x values end right here. But down here, for the left side of the x values, we have an arrow. So when we write our domain for that, the arrow means that the numbers go on and on and on forever. So we are going to include a parenthesis, a negative infinity because it's going on forever in the negative direction, and then my x-axis stops at 5, and it's a solid circle, so that means that 5 is included. We'll do a similar thing for the y-axis. So again, here is the top of our graph because we are stopping, and we're stopping at y equals 2, and again our range on our y-axis is going infinitely in the negative direction, so we're going to do the same thing. So we have negative infinity, and then again our y-axis is stopping at 2. It's a solid circle, so that means that the 2 is included. So our domain goes from negative infinity all the way to 5. And our range goes from negative infinity all the way to 2. And it'll be a little clearer on the next example. So let's take a look at example number 2. So here's example number 2, and again I'm going to box these in. So our domain, our x values, our domain goes from this open circle right here to this open circle right here. So our x-axis is going from negative 5 all the way to negative 2. And it is an open circle, which means that those numbers are not included. So our domain, we need a parenthesis, is negative 5. That means negative 5 is not included all the way up to negative 2. And negative 2 is also not included. So we're looking at these numbers right here for our domain. When we look at our range, we're going to do the same thing. So the range of our function goes from the bottom of negative 4 all the way to the top of positive 4. So this is our range: 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it's including all the points in between. So our range goes from, and the negative, negative 4, all the way up to the positive, which is positive 4, and because those are open circles, are numbers and are not included. And I think it's very helpful to include those lines to box them in if you're not sure about the domain and the range. So let's move on, which on your paper says example number 7, but that's okay. So we're going to do the same thing again with domain and range. Domain, again, is our x values, and we have a solid circle all the way over here at -5 and a solid circle all the way over here at +4. So that means our domain goes from, and it's solid, so it's including -5 and goes all the way to +4. So -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll do the same thing with our range. So our range, the bottom of our graph is right here. The lowest point is this point right here. The highest point is that point right there. So our range is going at our highest point, +3. It's a solid circle, so we are going to include +3 down to a -3. Sorry, it goes from -3 to +3, and we're including those numbers in there. It's a solid line and a solid circle, and this is a continuous graph. So the last example, this example here, we could also write this as -5x is greater than or equal to -5 and less than or equal to +4. So that's the same thing. Either one of those will be fine. This one would be -3. Y is greater than or equal to -3 but less than or equal to +3. So number 4, which on your paper says number 9. So this we really can't box in, because what happens to our graph here is that we are going, we have an arrow on both ends. So that means our graph is continuous in both directions. So it is going infinitely in both directions on the x and infinitely in both directions on the y-axis as well. So to write that, it's going from, not 8, sorry, -infinity, having trouble with my infinities, to +infinity on the x-axis, the domain, and same thing for the range, -infinity to +infinity. So the domain and the range, because there are arrows on both sides, these arrows here mean that it's going infinitely on in both the negative and positive directions on the x and the y-axis. Video question. Okay, now it is your turn. So let's take a look at these two video questions. Which choice below represents the domain and range of the graph? So again, keep in mind that you want to kind of box them in. Here's the lowest point on our y-axis and the highest point on our y-axis. And since there's dots on either end, this is the furthest to the left on our x-axis and the furthest right on our y-axis. So we're looking at everything that is inside this rectangle right here. How far does our y, where does it start, where does it end, where does it start, where does it end? And here the domain and range are written using greater than or equal to signs. So for example, let's go back for 1 second. So same thing, these are all solid circles, so our greater than and less than signs should be greater than, less than, and greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. And the number 2, what is the domain and range of the following graph? You can write that in interval notation. And the picture of our graph does include, let me just highlight that for you. So the graph does include this section here and that section right there. And you can write that in interval notation. Have a good night.